So welcome everybody to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about TEMPO. It's a phase 3 study of Pitolisant. This is the only clinical trial currently enrolling participants who struggle with daytime sleepiness, a challenge that so many people with Prader-Willi syndrome face. We are going to have time for questions at the end of the webinar. So please, if you have questions, go ahead and submit them through the Q&A panel. And with that, I don't want to have any delay. I'm going to just hand over controls to the Harmony team, who will introduce themselves and tell us more about their clinical trial. Rachel?
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. I'm Rachel Radomski with Harmony Biosciences. I lead our patient advocacy and engagement function, and I've had the privilege of working with FPWR and the PWS community really over the past 5 years since I joined Harmony. It's been a pleasure to get to know some of you and your families, and we're so excited to share more information with you about our clinical trial, which we are calling TEMPO. So you'll see here that the long name for our clinical trial, if you visit clinicaltrials.gov, is a phase 3 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled efficacy and safety study of Pitolisant. And the QR code up in the top right, if you want to snap a photograph, will take you to our study website. So all of the information that we're going to share today can be found on our study website as well. And it's really the place that you should go to find what are the most updated sites and all of that information. So with that, I'm going to dive in. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Dr. David Seiden, who is the Senior Medical Director on the TEMPO trial here at Harmony, and he will join me in sharing some more information about Pitolisant and our clinical trial. So if you haven't heard of Harmony Biosciences before, I just wanted to share with you, we are a pharmaceutical company that is based outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have around 250 employees. And one of the things I'm most proud of working at Harmony is our prioritization of innovation, but also empathy. And so while we are working on delivering treatments for rare neurological diseases like Prader-Willi syndrome, it's so important for us to stay engaged with your families, with your community, and be able to hopefully deliver something that will make a difference in your family's lives. So I also wanted to just quickly level set on clinical trials. If you're not familiar with clinical trials, that's fine. But I just wanted to share with you that a clinical trial is also called a clinical research study, and is conducted to learn whether an investigational medication is safe and effective. So those are the big two priorities for the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. And in investigational medicine, what we'll be talking about today, Pitolisant, is a substance that's being tested in the clinical study. And it's important to know that the Food and Drug Administration needs to approve all clinical trials before we are able to carry them out as a company in the community. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Dave, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about why we are studying Pitolisant in people living with Prader-Willi syndrome.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that. As Rachel mentioned, I'm the Senior Medical Director at Harmony, and I'll be heading up this study from the clinical development side of things. And just a little bit about my background. I'm a board certified sleep specialist and neurologist. And I was a practitioner for many years, before I actually moved over to pharma. And I've been with Harmony now about 2 years. So just a little background on Prader-Willi syndrome and Pitolisant. Of course, quite a bit. All of you know quite a bit about Prader-Willi syndrome, but I think the important take-home message about that particular disorder is that it's a problem with hypothalamic dysfunction. That is, the hypothalamus is an area in the brain responsible for certain critical functions like regulating hunger and satiety, regulating sleep-wake states. It's involved in growth hormone release and other endocrine functions. And if you think about it, Prader-Willi syndrome patients demonstrate symptoms related to that hypothalamic dysfunction. So, for example, there's these patients, the main reason we're studying it One of the issues, of course, is excessive daytime sleepiness. This is a result of a dysfunctional hypothalamus. Same thing with hyperphagia. This is a dysfunctional hunger satiety mechanism that's based in the hypothalamus. And of course, growth hormone deficiency and so on and so forth. A little more specifically, of course, the hypothalamus regulates sleep-wake stability via two important neuropeptides or neurotransmitters. One is called hypocretin. It's also known as orexin, and the other is histamine. And they work in concert in sort of complex ways to basically help maintain wakefulness. These two are quite important. There are other neurotransmitters involved in maintaining wakefulness, such as things you've probably heard about: serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, but we're sort of focusing on hypocretin and more specifically histamine. And in fact, Pitolisant, which is the medication that we're studying, currently marketed as Wakix, which has been approved for narcolepsy or cataplexy in adult patients, which is a different disorder whereby people are quite sleepy. But the way Pitolisant works is by essentially increasing histamine levels in the brain. And as I said, histamine is an important wake-promoting neurotransmitter. It works in concert with orexin/hypocretin, as well as other wake-promoting neurotransmitters. And as you know, again, sleepiness, we'll call it excessive daytime sleepiness or EDS, is a very important symptom in many patients with PWS. Sometimes can be as life-altering as hyperphagia or some of the behavioral disturbances that many people with PWS demonstrate. So with that, I think the next slide, Rachel, was yours, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I mentioned before, we're going to share a little bit of information on the TEMPO study, which is our phase 3 trial in people living with Prader-Willi syndrome or Pitolisant. But I did want to share with the community that we did complete a phase 2 trial in people living with Prader-Willi syndrome. And a phase 2 trial is completed to obtain preliminary data on whether or not the drug has the potential to work. And so these trials are often called signal detection studies. And we collect safety data, including any adverse effects of the drug. And then once these phase 2 studies are completed, pharmaceutical companies move on to what is known as a phase 3 trial, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And so I wanted to share that the Harmony's phase 2 trial in people living with Prader-Willi syndrome did provide preliminary data or a positive signal supporting further study of Pitolisant for excessive daytime sleepiness and a few other symptoms, which we'll talk about, in people living with Prader-Willi syndrome. And that data was reviewed by FDA and helped guide how we are now evaluating Pitolisant in the phase 3 study. So that's what I'll talk about next, TEMPO, which is our phase 3 study. So we're going to walk through very high level our objectives, selected key inclusion criteria, key exclusion criteria, some study highlights, and then we'll provide information on clinical trial sites. So what are the objectives of the TEMPO study? So the primary objective, as we've been talking about a lot, is we'll be evaluating the impact of Pitolisant in treating excessive daytime sleepiness, otherwise known as EDS, in people with PWS. But in addition to the primary main objective, we're also going to look at a couple of other symptoms that are common in people living with Prader-Willi syndrome. So that's the severity of irritability, the severity of disruptive behaviors, as well as hyperphagia. So if you're interested in potentially pursuing the trial or learning more information, we'd like to share some key inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. So just please know that this is not a comprehensive list of inclusion criteria. You can find that on clinicaltrials.gov, or you could also reach out to one of the study sites to talk about your loved one that's living with Prader-Willi syndrome and provide some more information. but these are the ones we think are really important. So male or female, so 6 years or older at the time of your screening appointment, having a genetically confirmed diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome. And if your child or loved one does not have a genetic test that's already been done, it can be performed at the site to ensure that that is on file. The person living with Prader-Willi syndrome also needs to have excessive daytime sleepiness at the time of screening and at the time of the baseline appointment. And that will be assessed at the clinic during both the screening and the baseline visit. And that is comprised of several assessments as well as a sleep diary that will be done at home by the caregiver. And that leads to the last bullet. So this study, it's really important for someone living with PWS to have a consistent parent or caregiver during the study. And preferably that would be the same person throughout the entire study. Now, what are some of the key exclusion criteria? So this is, again, not a comprehensive list of exclusion criteria, but should help you get a little bit more information. So if you have previously taken Pitolisant, you would not be eligible for this clinical trial. You would also not be eligible for the trial if you have a diagnosis of sleep apnea, so OSA or CSA, that is not adequately controlled. If you do have a diagnosis of sleep apnea that is being managed, you could be eligible for the trial. You also will not be able to participate in a research study involving another investigational medication, so another clinical trial, medication, device, or behavioral treatment within 30 days. You also need to be on a stable dose of current medications, or you may have to discontinue prohibited medications in order to be eligible for the trial. Again, you can have a conversation with the study site or with our team here to figure out which may be prohibited medications. But one thing I would like to share is you can remain on human growth hormone during the trial, as we know that is something that is very commonly used or incredibly important to the PWS community. And then the last exclusion criteria. So you must experience less than a required amount of sleep per night based on the age of the person participating in the trial and data collected during screening in the sleep diary. And so what we're really looking for here are people to participate in the clinical trial that are experiencing excessive daytime sleepiness because they're living with Prader-Willi syndrome and not for other reasons. So again, that's something you can discuss with the study site to learn more information about. So these are our study highlights. We will be hopefully enrolling about 134 people in the study, and this will be a global clinical trial. So we will have sites in the United States, Canada, and then ex-North America, outside of North America as well. We are hopeful that we'll get about 60 participants from the United States. As I mentioned before, an active caregiver is required for the study to participate in the study. This is incredibly important. And then how long is the trial? So the duration of the overall study is expected to be 4 to 6 months, with an option to continue into the open label extension. So that's what you'll see in the next slide on the study design. So your screening and baseline period, where the study site will determine whether or not you're eligible to participate in the study, could last up to 45 days. The treatment period, where your loved one will be receiving either Pitolisant or placebo, or otherwise known as a sugar pill or a placebo, is 11 weeks. And then there is the optional open label extension period, where if you decide to opt in and qualify, everyone receives Pitolisant for up to a year, and then a follow-up period after that. So what Dave will talk about next is the treatment period that you see in the light orange. So the 11 weeks that your loved one would be participating in what's known as the double-blind treatment period.
Okay, thank you for that excellent summary, Rachel. So just to sort of wrap up regarding what you would see during the trial, from an operational standpoint in terms of visits. just wanted to give you a little background on that. So as Rachel mentioned, you would be assigned to either a certain dose of Pitolisant or a placebo. And that dose is based on the person's weight, which is a little different than our prior signal detection proof of concept study, as Rachel was mentioning, where that was based on the person's age. So that's a little different. And the participant, again, along with the help of the caregiver, would be taking one dose of Pitolisant each morning upon awakening through day 77 for 11 weeks. Again, as Rachel mentioned, there's a period of time where we try to titrate to get the dose, to get you to the appropriate weight-based dose. And then at some point you would be on that stable dose, wherever that lands. There would be a telehealth visit at day 22. You can see there's a mix of both telehealth and in-person visits at the clinic. And those in-person visits would be on day 29, day 57, and again at day 77, which is the last day of what we call the double blind period. That is the period where you're getting either Pitolisant or placebo. And of course, you don't know, and the person with Prader-Willi syndrome does not know what they're getting. You are blinded, and the site staff are also blinded. That's why we call it double blind. And then at day 77, which is that last day of the double blind treatment, there is an option then to go ahead and roll over into a 1-year open label trial. Open label means you are no longer blinded and you're not getting placebo. You're getting the real medication. And that would continue on for a year. So that's generally operationally, what the trial would look like.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
And then the last thing we have to share with you all is what sites are currently open and recruiting, and where we anticipate to open sites in the United States later this year. And so what you'll see here in that sort of purpley dark red color are the sites that are currently open. So that is those are in Los Angeles, California, Atlanta, Georgia, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Weslaco, Texas. And so the principal investigator is the physician that's carrying out the study there. You do not have to be a patient of these physicians in order to call the trial site and see if you may be eligible. This is open to anyone in the community. You also do not have to live in the specific state, region, or area. You can visit any of these sites, and we also have a travel stipend reimbursement program that you can learn more about on our website. So these are the 4 sites that are currently open and recruiting. The most important place to look here is the contact. So that's the site coordinator that you would contact, Pooja, Amanda, Tamala, and Preston, with their phone numbers. And then the orange stars that you see are anticipated sites that will open later in 2024. So we are hoping to make this study geographically diverse and available for folks spread around the country. Our team is working to open these sites on a daily basis. So please stay tuned. We are hopeful to have these sites open before the end of this year. And the best place to stay up to date on which sites are open are the FPWR email listserv and website, as well as the Tempo website. So tempopwsstudy.com is what where you'll visit if you take a screenshot of the QR code here, or you can reach out to our team. The best way to do that is by emailing clinicaltrials@harmonybiosciences.com. Or if you'd like to chat with me, you can email advocacy@harmonybiosciences.com. But if you do have trial-specific questions, it's really the website or clinicaltrials@harmonybiosciences.com that are the best places to visit. So with that, I'll pull down the slides, and Dave and I are happy to take, I think we have about 9-10 minutes. Susan, happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, Rachel, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation. And at this time, we're happy to accept any questions from folks who are on the call with us today. While we're waiting for some of those questions to come in, I just have to, say, clinical trials are only made possible by volunteers participating in them. We all want treatments for our kids. The faster that we can enroll these studies, the faster we get the information that we need to determine if these treatments truly are effective and safe for our loved ones with PWS. So thank you to everyone who joined on this call or is watching this recording. I would also encourage all of you, if you know people in the community whose children are struggling, in this case with excessive daytime sleepiness, please continue to share information about this trial. Send them a link to this webinar, send them a link to the directory. We really do need everyone enrolling and participating as able. And what a great opportunity if you live somewhere in the US, if you want to come out and visit California. There's a site in LA. It's beautiful this time of year. Call and get into one of those clinical trials. It's a great chance to see a different city or a different state. Rachel, it looks like perhaps you did such a great job that we don't have questions coming into the queue. But I would encourage anyone, we're happy to stay on the line. If there's questions, you can just type them into the Q&A and send them on in. I always have the question, Rachel, about Provigil. Some people have taken Provigil for their loved ones who have daytime sleepiness. Perhaps it doesn't work well for them. They want to try something else. How are you managing that particular medication in this clinical trial?
Yeah, I'll kick that question over to Dave as the medical lead on the trial.
Sure. So you have two options if you're on Provigil. If it's not working for you and you're not interested in continuing that, you could stop Provigil, and there's a certain washout period, we call it, where we wouldn't want that. We'd want, if you're going to come off it, we'd want you off it for a period of time, and then we could assess how sleepy you are at that point. Or alternatively, you could stay on Provigil, and as long as you're on a stable dose and it hasn't changed and there's no plans to change the dose, you could continue on Provigil and still come into, and still enter the trial.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So many people with PWS are on a cocktail of different medications, perhaps for anti-anxiety, depression, OCD. Are there any lists of medications that are expressly prohibited that people should know about?
There is a list of prohibited medications, but I will tell you that we're pretty open. For the most part, this trial is pretty open in terms of allowing patients to maintain on their medications as long as they're on a stable dose. I mean, we could get into specifics about different medications that might be prohibited, but generally, we've designed the trial in such a way that we've tried to keep those medications to a minimum. For example, as you mentioned, Susan, if you're already on a cocktail, let's say, with another one or maybe more wake promoting agents, you can continue on with those agents. You can continue on, for example, with certain medications that might be used to help with behavioral issues, some of the antidepressants, so there are things that are allowed, again, as a general rule of thumb, as long as you're on a stable dose. But that would be, something that specifically would be dealt with, at the screening visit with the discuss with the principal investigator as to what's appropriate and what's not. And I think Susan might be frozen.
Yeah, of course, Susan might have froze. I did see a question come in, Dave, because I could see the Q&A. It's, if a previous stimulant medication was tried and didn't work and is no longer being taken, is there still hope for Pitolisant to work? So I think I'll start, and then Dave, can you color in here? So one thing that you should know about Pitolisant is it is not a stimulant. So it has a a different mechanism of action than stimulants. So Dave, can you cover that a little bit, please?
Yeah. So that's exactly right, Rachel. It's not a stimulant medication. It works completely different mechanism of action through histamine. Most of the stimulants, of course, work through norepinephrine and some dopamine as well. So it's a different neurotransmitter that we're targeting. The nice thing about pitolisant also is that it is not, and I'm talking about now the branded form of pitolisant called Wakix, which is on the market currently for narcolepsy and cataplexy. It is not a. It's not a. I'm blocking on the what it's called. I'm sorry. It's not a scheduled. It's not a scheduled drug. Why? I'm not sure why I couldn't remember that word. It's not a scheduled drug like some of the or most of the stimulant medications. A lot of those ADHD drugs, for example, that you may be familiar with, like Adderall and Strattera and things of that nature. Those are scheduled drugs, or also known as controlled substances. Pitolisant is not a controlled substance. So I think it has some advantages in that regard, and it's a very well tolerated medication based on prior trials that we've done with the medication.
Thanks. And then there's one more question that came in. I think we did answer this. So what is the biggest difference with modafinil? So there is a big difference in terms of pitolisant being a non-scheduled as well as non-stimulant medication that works through histamine, as Dave was explaining. But the second part of the question, so asking from Barcelona, any chance we can participate in Europe? Yes. So we are working to open US trial sites as well as trial sites outside of the US. So that will be Canada, Europe, as well as Australia. So I know we are going to provide an update to the International Prader-Willi Syndrome Organization in September, but I will say the European and Australian and Canadian sites will happen late in this year as well as into 2025. So please stay tuned. I think with that, it did make me the host because Susan was booted out here, but it is been such a pleasure to share this with the community. And just to echo Susan's comments earlier, we could not move forward without partnering and working with the Prader-Willi syndrome community. A sincere and heartfelt thank you to those of you that have participated in the phase 2 or the phase 1 trial in Prader-Willi syndrome for pitolisant. Participating in clinical trials, as Susan said, is crucial, but we know it also takes a commitment by your family and your loved one. So a sincere thank you, as I said. And we hope if you'd like any more information on the TEMPO trial or pitolisant, please feel free to reach out to us here at Harmony. You can also contact us through FPWR. Or you can reach out to one of the sites that are screening. Thank you all. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.